Right. So today I'm here with Henry, co-founder of Context.ai. Henry was ex-Google product manager and has a lot of experience in the tech space. Context.ai is a company that specializes in building better LLM products with evals and analytics. So Henry, I'm going to hand it over to you to showcase what it is, why it's important, and anything else that'll be useful for the audience.
Fantastic. Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Mayor. Excited to show you what we've got. And as you mentioned, what we do at Context is we enable people to run evals and analytics over their LLM products. And why would you want to do that? It's really, once you've built a first MVP, you want to stress test it and understand how well is it going to perform before you launch it. And then after you launch it, you want to understand how are real people using it and how is it performing in production. And so that's where you use the analytics side. So what we're going to show today is a demo of both of those things. And we're going to use a customer support chatbot use case for an airline that I built using RAG. Does that sound good? Should we jump in?
Yeah, let's do it.
Fantastic. So what we're going to do first is run a couple of evals to test various prompt templates that we're going to try to improve the performance of our application with. Then once we're comfortable with the performance, then we're going to look at how our analytics will help you understand how users are engaging with the product and how well is the product performing in production. So what do we see as the problem we're trying to solve here? It's that eval workflows today are often pretty painful. They're ad hoc, they're manual, they take a lot of time. And as a result, that means they're pretty inconsistent and you don't effectively test releases. That means problems can slip out into production and performance can be disappointing. And so what we also see is that evals don't predict performance with real users. And so you can do all this, expensive, time-consuming evaluation, and then you launch something to production and it flops and it's disappointing. And so that's where you want to try and correlate your evals with real user outcomes with the analytics side of the product. And so this is where, we think the ultimate test for LLM applications lies. The ultimate test, the ultimate place where the rubber meets the road is how does it perform with real users? And to judge that, you need to know how are people using your product, how well are user needs being met, what problems have real users found, and then how can you make your product even better by addressing those problems. And so what we're going to do today is go through a demo and a workflow of how you'd go about doing that. So first of all, I'm just going to click over to this collab that we've set up. This is where you can see we've just got a basic LangChain RAG application. So here you can see we're just installing LangChain. Then we've got a couple of functions that are going to generate a test set, and then a set of test cases that we're going to use to stress test this application with. We have a prompt template that we're going to show in a second, and these functions just format the prompts, generate the prompt template, and define the test cases and the test set. Here we're just generating our vectors, and then this is where it gets interesting. This is where we have a prompt template for this RAG application. We have a set of queries that we're going to feed into that prompt template. We have a set of queries that we're going to use to test the application. And then we have a set of evaluators that we're going to run over the application using the prompt template. And then we're going to assess how well the application performs. So I'm going to just quickly run this from here. So here we're going to just save the prompt template, generate the good queries, load them all into a test set, and then upload them. And so what we've done here is we've generated a test set. I can go through the previous steps. We've generated a test set of 6 test cases using these user queries. And then we've used a RAG setup to pull relevant documents from a document library, which we pulled just from an airline's customer support website. And now we have these context windows that have been loaded into our context application for evaluation. So we'll swap over to context. And here we can see, if we refresh, here we can see a new version of this test set that's been piped through. So now we're looking at the context application. We're in the evaluation section, and we have this concept of a test set. This test set has a whole group of test cases, and each test case is a context window that we're going to load into the application. We're going to run the context window against the provided model, which in this case is GPT 3.5. We can see the context window that's been provided. So here's a prompt template or a helpful assistant working to address customer support queries. Here you can see the documents that have been injected by the RAG system. And then here you can see the user query, which is going to be used to test the application. And here you can see the model. So we have 6 of these test cases that have been defined. And these were set up and loaded by the collab that I previously showed. So in addition to setting up the context windows, we've also configured evaluators. So here you can see some of these queries are relevant questions like how does baggage reclaim work? What food can I bring through customs? Where can I find my booking reference? And for these cases, we've got 2 evaluators applied. One is the attempt answer evaluator, and one is our faithfulness evaluator. So this is where we're assessing, does the model actually attempt to answer or does it refuse to answer? And obviously we want the model to refuse to answer questions that are not about the retrieved context. And then we have faithfulness, which is an evaluation that checks for hallucination and looks at, is every statement in the generated response faithful to the retrieved context? And so what we'll do is we'll run these context windows through the application, we'll run the evaluators, and then we'll look at how it performs. Do you have any questions or comments on that before we press run?
Yeah, so the decision of the test, the different the data sets for the test, how do you create that? Is that the model that creates that?
Yeah, so we've defined that here. So the user defines that. And this is where you basically want to come up with a set of representative test cases that are going to give you nice testing of your application. And by nice, I mean they cover a broad range of potential use cases. You really want to have these test cases cover a couple of different groups. You want to have kind of typical usage, which is going to show the rough usage patterns that you'd expect to see from real users. And then some questions that are off topic and adversarial, where you're actually going to try and test the robustness of your application and its guardrails to see, is it going to stay on topic? Is it going to perform correctly, even in these adversarial kind of test cases? Because you're going to see users who are going to try and break your application, and you want to make sure that your application performs well when that happens. So let's now run this test case. So you can see here we have only replied to questions about airline customer support requests. And so hopefully we're only going to get responses to those queries. So let's click run. And now when we click run, 2 things are happening. First, the response to the context window is generated. And then the evaluator is run over the response to determine, is this a good response or is this a bad response? And so if we click and view the responses here, then we can see some examples such as this one. So here we've got a user input, which is what's the cost of a single ticket to London to New York, which is not related to airline customer support. And here you can see the model has refused to respond. So that's responded correctly, and that's where the refuse answer evaluator has resolved correctly and said the LLM has not attempted to respond. Here we've got an example which we want to respond, and you can see that we've got this attempt answer evaluator assigned. And then here you can see the question is, how does baggage reclaim work? And now the answer has been attempted, which is good because that's a real query about real customer support of an airline. But actually, there's been a whole bunch of context that's been added here by the model, by GPT 3.5, that is not contained in the context window. And that is why the faithfulness evaluator here has failed. And here we can see the faithfulness evaluator has resolved to red. And why is it resolved to red? Well, we have reasoning, which shows each of the statements contained in the generated response. And then we have the reason that it's failed, which is the context does not mention these statements, and the model has gone and hallucinated them on their own. Now, in this case, they're not particularly egregious because it's an example I wanted to have be easily understandable. But if you wanted your application to strictly follow the context documents that have been provided and not veer off topic and use the models like innate knowledge, then this would be very useful to detect hallucination. So what we've done so far is generate a test set, run that test set, and evaluate the responses. And we can see we've got pretty good performance, which is great. And what we can then go to do is change the prompt template and see if we can change how the application is going to perform. Does that make sense so far? Great. I'll just continue. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go back to my collab, and I can also make changes to the context windows and the test cases in the application. But I think it's most interesting to show in this Colab UI, because this is how a lot of people interact with the application today. They want to be API first, and especially if you're using a RAG setup, then you're going to want your prompts are going to vary every time. So you need to use a script to generate the prompts each time. So what we're going to do now is we're going to remove this line from the prompt template saying only reply to questions about airline customer support requests. So now we've not told the model to respond only to conversations about customer support requests that relate to airlines. And so it's going to be much more broad and much more generous. And we're going to do that to test, is this actually better, or does this encourage the model to veer off topic? And so you can imagine, obviously, this is a really easy and simple change, but this is actually very useful when you're going through a workflow trying to iterate on a prompt template, where you're trying to do some prompt engineering, and you want to see which is going to perform better, the old prompt or the new prompt. And when you want to make this kind of change, what you'll typically do is define a whole bunch of test cases, as we've just done, and then run the old prompt, run the new prompt, and see how each perform. And then you can take the highest performing one. So here we're going to see we've got this old this modified prompt template. I'm going to save that. I'm going to reload the good queries. I'm going to generate the test cases, and then we're going to submit them to the application. And so what we've done there is take this updated set of test cases with this amended prompt that no longer says only respond to test cases, only respond to questions about airline customer support. And now they've been loaded into the application. So if I refresh, then I can click through here to the new version, version 5, which you can see has not yet been run. And then if I click into any one of these, then we'll see that the context window and the prompt has been updated. And here you can see now we no longer have that line that says only respond to questions about customer support requests for the airline. You can additionally edit any of these test cases in the UI. So if you wanted to go and edit line by line, then you can do. And you can additionally do bulk updates to the model that you use or the prompt. But I think for the purposes of this case and for this audience, it's most interesting to interact with the product via API. So now we'll click back, and we're going to run this modified test case. So again, we're going to regenerate all the responses. Then once the responses have been generated, we're going to evaluate those responses. And then we're going to see how has the application performed with the modified prompt, and does it perform better or worse than the previous version. So we'll just wait for these last few calls to be completed. Fantastic. And so here, immediately, you can see there's been more failures. So here you can see the query is what's the capital of England, and you can see the assistant has just responded and said the capital of England is London. Now, the evaluator in this case has been assigned to say refuse answer, because we do not want the model to be responding to the kind of random geographical facts, and we want it to be sticking to airline customer support requests. And so here you can see this evaluator has failed because the LLM has answered the question. And actually, that's because we aren't telling the model only answer questions about airline customer support requests. And it's a similar story here with the Heathrow Airport query, where you can see again, the assistant has given a response, and so the evaluator has failed and flagged this. So the use case now is I tried one prompt, I tried another prompt. I think I can tell which one's better, but I want to do a comparison. And so here you can now do compare to and look at a previous version. And here you can see each of the evaluators that has been assigned to that test set. And you can see some of them have failed. So here you can see the initial version, version 4, you can see if passed in all 3 cases. Whereas version 5, when I modified the prompt, it's failed in 2 out of 3 cases. So that obviously suggests that the older version was better and the newer version was worse. And that is going to be a similar story when I click through these other, but the others have actually all passed because they weren't problems in either case. There's the refuse answer evaluator that's detected the regression here. And so, okay, I think we can come to the conclusion that it was worth keeping this line in the prompt, and that we can reintroduce it by doing Command Z. So that's a high level of the evaluation process. Obviously, this is a very simplistic example where we're just adding or removing the line about staying on topic and only answering questions about the provided content. But you can use this same approach to address much more complex workflows where you're doing advanced prompt engineering, modifying different prompts, different models, and even different rank systems and locally hosted models or anything like that. One other thing to note is that you can provide the generated responses rather than relying on us to generate the response. You can upload that as part of the API request. So here in the collab, we could additionally be generating the responses locally if you had a locally hosted, fine-tuned or open source model, and you could generate the response, submit that to Context, and then we would just do the evaluation stage. And then you would be able to look through these versions of the test sets and compare across different locally hosted, fine-tuned or open source models to still iterate towards the best performance for your application. So that's the eval side. Mayo, did you have any questions about that? And then we can go into the analytics side too.
Yeah, so I think a big challenge here is what to test next, right? So obviously it's good to see the evaluation, but the question is what next, right? So I try a prompt and I can see clearly it's failed.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously this can get very tedious at scale, right? You could have an infinite amount of iterations, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially if your prompt is very comprehensive. So how do we figure out the next steps to take based on feedback?
Yeah, totally. So I think how we typically see people understand, identify areas to address and where they should focus their efforts is actually the next stage, which is analytics, which is looking. You've got users live in production, understand where is the product falling short for these users, and then maybe there's some groups of queries that actually have got really disappointing performance in production, and then you can say, okay, one of these groups of usage is actually addressable, and then I can see, well, okay, why is this falling short? Maybe my prompt doesn't address some subset of my users, and actually something my prompt kind of obviously conflicts with what the users are providing to an application. And so we really see the best source of information about what you should do next and how you should improve your prompts as being a real user behavior and the real user usage signals. And so that's where we encourage you to look through real user transcripts, look at where your users are frustrated to understand what's driving that, and then you can see how can you improve your prompt to try and address those shortcomings.
So, but even with that, there's still a ton of ways you could iterate on the prompt that could affect the accuracy of benchmarking, right? So, obviously we're in the base level you can have a very simple prompt, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, production use cases, most of the time with serious applications, the prompt can be like super long. It could be, multiple paragraphs, for example.
Absolutely.
So that's what I mean is kind of how to efficiently tweak the prompt based on the outputs here, so that the next iteration is kind of closer to perfection, if that makes sense.
Got it. Yeah, absolutely. So obviously prompt engineering is hard, and I don't think there's like a magic solution. I wish we could say, if you do these three things, it's going to perform reliably better. I think there's two things that we would suggest. The first is to test lots of variations using evaluation-driven development. And so that's where you have loads of test sets defined, and you can look at the performance impact of changes you're making across many sets. I think the second is using a tool like our Playground, where you can actually see side by side how different prompts are going to perform, and you can do that in real time. So here you can copy in as long a prompt as you like in the first column and the second column with different models, different model configs, and then for as many user inputs as you want to test. And then here you can say, write me a 2-line joke about, but this could be any variation that you wanted and any prompt that you wanted. And then you can really quickly test different prompts against the large number of test cases. So I think this is actually how I'd recommend doing that prompt engineering. You have your existing prompt here. You're testing lots of variations of new prompts there against a set of user queries, and then you can very rapidly iterate and change details and get the feedback in near real time, rather than having to go and rerun loads of long evaluations. So typically this playground is where that journey would start, and you do a lot of iteration and find a candidate that you want to thoroughly evaluate, and then you'd export your evaluation set and test that prompt more thoroughly against a lot of test cases with automatic evaluation. That makes sense?
Yep, got it.
Fantastic. But yeah, it's a great question. And obviously prompt engineering is hard, right? Like, I think I'd be interested to hear, suggestions from other folks when you do have problems with your prompts. how do you know what to try next? And I think there's lots of good content online about it, but I don't think there's I don't think there's any easy answers there, because it does vary so much by application. So that's the evaluation workflow. That's really how you stress test your application, before you stress test a release before you ship it to your real users, and whether that change or that release is a new prompt or a new model, a new rank system. But what do you do once you've launched that model and it's live in production, or once you've launched that change and it's live in production? That's where you want to monitor how are people using it. You want to understand how well is it performing, and then those signals are going to help you address problems and make the overall performance even better. So to do that, I'm going to shift to the analytics view. And this is all based around this concept of user transcripts. So here you can see we've logged all the transcripts that real users have had with an application in production. We can apply filters to these, look at all the conversations that have happened within any date range, and then we can also look at the conversations that have like positive or negative user feedback signals, user sentiment. But then you can click into any one of these conversations and read the full transcript, including the prompt that was used, including the user query, the assistant responses, and then the full history of the conversation. But then what we do is we annotate these transcripts. We look at what are the topics of conversation, and then we apply these topic tags. We additionally look for feedback signals. Like here you can see a thumbs up signal from a user. And I'm sure there'll be another example where we can see user messages that have high sentiment, for example, here. So those are great signals that your users are satisfied with your application. What you can then additionally do as a user of our product is apply manual ratings. So you can say, this was a fantastic answer, or you could mark this as being, a really disappointing answer, and then label this to investigate for another member of your team to go and debug and dive deeper. So that's like the base layer of the analytics side, which is really all around these logs, then this annotation on top of the logs. What you can then do is go into those topics that we assigned to each conversation, and you can see the use cases that users are actually having in your product. Why are people using your application? And so now this is actually a demo of a shoe store customer support, and you can see all the various conversation topics that are being discussed with the application. And then you can see we are also assigning ratings to these by looking at the user sentiment and the user thumbs up, thumbs down ratio. And this will help you understand how well is each of these topics being handled by your application. And here you can see some of these queries are being handled really well, and others might be being handled really poorly. So once you've identified one of these areas that is being handled either well or poorly, you can click in, for example, here to conversations that are about running shoes. And then you'll see summary statistics just for all the conversations that are about that one topic. So here you can see, the volume of conversations that are about running shoes. You can see the average user input sentiment when it comes to this conversation topic. You can see the thumbs up, thumbs down rating. You can see the adjacent topics, what are people talking about this topic alongside, the lengths of the conversations, the languages, and the costs as well. But then where this gets really interesting is when you can debug. So one of those conversation topics might be performing really well, but another might be performing poorly. And now you can look at all the conversation transcripts that are specifically about that topic. And you can see, okay, here's a disappointing answer, for example, where there's a thumbs down. And so you can go and debug and look at exactly what happened and try and pull out those patterns to understand how you can how you can find a problem. And then from the identification of problem, you can come up with a hypothesis of an improvement. And then once you've made that improvement, you're obviously going to evaluate it before you release it. A couple of final things to touch on. One is this per user tracking. So this is where we let you monitor how individual users are engaging with the application. And by that, I mean, how much of your usage is coming from new users versus your most engaged veteran users? What topics of conversation do new users use your application for versus what are the use cases for your most engaged users? And then you can click in and actually look at like the retention curve or the cohort retention of individual users that have signed up for your graph at 1 week versus another week, and see how those are churning versus sticking around. And that's really the high level of the product. It's where you can understand in production how people are using the application. You can understand in production how well a user needs being met, and then you can see where are those user needs falling short, so that I can improve those shortcomings, and then you can evaluate and improve the application, all as part of this constant cycle. And perhaps that's probably the final slide that I just flashed is, this is how we see the cycle of product development. You build some change, You evaluate it a bunch of times until you found a change that you're happy to make. You launch it. You then analyze how it performs with real users, and then you identify a problem. You make a change to address the problem, and you kind of repeat. And what we do at Context is it's evaluation and this analyzing stage so that you can make the product performance better and iterate towards, hopefully, an even better experience. And that is the high level of the demo. Any questions that I can answer?
Yeah, a lot of interesting stuff here. So how are you seeing companies using these insights to improve performance of applications, I guess, ultimately, driving sales and customer satisfaction? What kind of use cases are you seeing?
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think the most common use case still is like LLM for customer support. And I think this screen is really where we're seeing a lot of the value come for people on the analytics side. This is where we're segmenting all the use cases and saying, okay, for queries about this one conversation topic, then performance is really disappointing. And what you can then do is debug and understand exactly what's driving the disappointing performance for conversations about running shoes, let's just say. And you can then understand what's driving that problem. You can then go and fix that problem with some prompt engineering, is by far the most common workflow that we see. And then you can get that out to production. So that, I'd say, is where the most end value is being delivered today. I'd say second to that is making the eval workflow more systematic and automated, because a lot of eval processes today are like really painful and slow, and people aren't satisfied with them. And actually providing structure to that, providing automation around that has really been helping people to just save a lot of time in the evaluation process so they can move faster. So I'd say it's probably those two pretty different strengths of eval workflow and making that much less painful, and then helping you identify areas of poor performance.
Right. So say with the example you just showed with the topics, so what are the steps that a team or a company can take, or you've seen that's been effective from the analytics to a tangible outcome?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, there's been a lot. The big thing is just you find one of these conversation topics, and this is a demo, so I don't have loads of poorly performing ones. But you would find one of these conversation topics. Let's say queries about like a certain brand or a certain type of question. Let's say like customer support queries, or let's take queries about returns policies. Let's just say we were seeing really negative sentiment and really negative user feedback signals here. What that would allow me to do is I go through, debug exactly in the transcripts, okay, what is driving this? And maybe it's just the underlying customer support policy for returns is really disappointing. But maybe there's something in my prompt which is incorrect about the returns policies. And so what you can then do is go and drive, boot up your prompt templates, improve the prompt to address this shortcoming, do a bunch of testing, and then bring up the customer satisfaction with this conversation topic, because you can improve that prompt, you can get that change out to production, and then you can actually see measurably over time as the sentiment and the thumbs up, thumbs down rating improves for this topic. So it's about giving you the tools to find a problem, and then giving you the tools to measure the impact of the change you make afterwards. And the metrics that we see move most often are, the average sentiment and the thumbs up, thumbs down ratings of the users.
And does Context also do this with existing data as opposed to via a chatbot? So for example, if a company already has historical data, like tons of data already, is that something that the Context does?
Yeah, absolutely. So we support ingesting, backfilling large amounts of past data, as well as ongoing integrations that send a continuous stream of data. And it's actually a good opportunity to talk about the integration process. So we have SDKs in Python and JavaScript that make integration like 15, 30 minutes of work. And how it works is you just log conversations to us after they've completed. So we are not in the critical path of the LLM call. There's no proxy or anything like that. You just take the conversation transcript after it's been completed and you log it to us. And that can be a couple of seconds after the conversation, or it could be like a cron job at the end of the day. You log those conversations to us, and then we'll run the analytics and present it to you. And that means you can do a one-off upload of your last month of data, or you can be sending on a continuous stream. The analytics works either way.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah. So essentially, still getting the analytics through data points that are not necessarily a chatbot.
Yes, so we support non-chatbot use cases as well. Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I think there's two dimensions there. There's like, is it live ongoing usage that you want to log in near real time, or do you have a month of past data? So we support both of those. And then yeah, an additional dimension is, does it have to be a chatbot, or can it be a non-chatbot LLM use case? And yeah, absolutely, we support plenty of non-chatbot LLM use cases as well. Agent frameworks, data extraction tasks, and this is especially true on the evaluation side of things. Because you can really define evals that are going to test your application, any number of ways, and it could be a summarization task, could be a text expansion task, could be data extraction, and you can evaluate any of those workflows in the tool. So it does not have to be a chatbot.
Mm-hmm. And what about use cases that are kind of multimodal? So it could be similar cases of dealing with data or documents, but then maybe the documents are mixed in with tables and images. And these images contain graphs. This would be use cases commonly for a lot of companies to use like PowerPoint or interact with images that contain valuable information. So does this also work with that?
Not yet, but it will do soon. Multimodal is on the roadmap and will be coming soon. But yeah, right now we are text only on the analytics and the eval side.
Cool. Okay.
Great stuff. Anything else I can answer? I think that was the high level of what I wanted to demo, but I'm happy to address any other questions or hang around in the comments as well.
Yeah, so I think these are the main. So what would you say differentiates this from say other solutions out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing is this analytics with the evals. I think what you really want to do is test a release before you launch it really thoroughly with evals, and then you want to launch it to real users, and then you want to understand how is it performing with real users, how is it performing in production, and the ability to do both of those journeys in the same place, to stress test the application before launch, and then to evaluate performance after launch with real users. Doing that in one place is what we do uniquely and best. So that's where I'd encourage people to give us a try, is if you have a product where you want to monitor how well it's performing in both the dev and the prod stages.
Okay, cool. So you mentioned the integration.
Yeah, so integration is pretty straightforward. It's all self-serve, so you don't need to talk to anyone. You can just go to docs.context.ai, and we'll put the link in the description. And yeah, we have an SDK that makes it very straightforward. You just log transcripts to us via the SDK, and we just have an API endpoint where you log transcripts using our conversation schema, and then we ingest them for analytics. And it's very similar on the evaluation side. You use our API to ingest test cases, and just as I demonstrated in the collab, and you can additionally use the UI as well, so you can get started without having to make any code changes at all on the evaluation side, and with pretty minimal code changes on the analytics side. We're typically seeing integration for people that are using the SDKs take like 15 to 30 minutes, and we have a free plan as well, so people can just get started and test it out themselves.
Awesome. So next steps for anyone who's kind of watching this, more interested in learning more, kind of playing around with context, see if it's a good fit for them, where would you direct them to?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, check out our website, Context.ai, and you can just sign up there. So click Get Started and sign in. You'll get an API key. You can go and visit our docs.context.ai, look at the integration instructions, and it should be very straightforward. People are having any problems getting ingested and getting set up in most cases. But any questions at all, feel free to drop me an email, Henry@Context.ai, and I or someone on the team will be able to help you out.
The name of the company, is there a story behind that? Because I can't imagine how expensive the domain because it's a one word domain. How did you decide in content? I'm also asking because you've got a product management background, so.
Yeah, so I mean, initially we had a terrible name, which was Woolly AI, and everyone laughed when we said we were called Woolly. No one could spell it. We'd get horribly misspelled emails, and I think people were trying to find us online and really struggling to. And we decided, okay, Woolly is not going to cut it. Did a little bit of brainstorming, and this is where we landed up. So I think it's better than Woolly, but I don't know. Maybe we should swap back one day.
No. It's very. So did you just find the domain and like, or did you have to buy it off someone? Because Context, like, probably a very popular.
Yeah, no, we did have to buy the domain, but we're pretty happy with it. Like, it's it helps people find us, and it's definitely easier to find than the Woolly AI.
All right, awesome. All right, thanks, Henry.
Great, thanks so much, Mayo. See you later.